Oh, wait, I got it wrong. It's fail factory. Look at that. Just innovated, iterated. So this weekend, I was at my oldest daughter's soccer game, and all the kids ran out onto the field, and there was a grandpa next to me of another child that said, "Go get him. It's all about having fun." Then the dad in front of him turned around and said, "You know, in life, it's all about winning." I was like, man, that cut. Like I was just overheard this, and I was like, man, it does. I don't like that at all, because you know, downstairs, while we're like innovating here on the Slack stuff, we're failing all the time, and that kind of like hit me. I was like, man, winning, failing. How do those two things like come together, and like how do you reconcile like what that is? Because everybody says, hey, you should fail often, fail forward. You know, you learn from failing, but yet we put things on a pedestal that are winning, like, because I mean, we win clients, we win jobs, we win accolades. Winning is a big deal. So how do those two things live together? So they live together because they're in harmony. One helps the other. The more you fail, the better you succeed. And then it's an endless cycle, and they build on each other, and they keep repeating and getting more and more intense until you win. You know this guy? This is Michael Jordan. This is probably a side of Michael Jordan you don't ever hear about. He's missed lots of shots. He's bricked lots of final game-winning shots. He's done lots of things that you would consider being failures. But he says that's the reason he succeeds, is because he's done all those things, which gives you a different light on like failing. So, in honor of MJ, I'm going to give you 3 ideas, 3 different ways that you can exercise your creativity and embrace failing. So, one way to do that is to just do something. This guy, Aaron Draplin, when he was in this same room, he gave a great example on how to actually fail in little tiny increments until you get to your final creative deliverable, because what he did was he opened up a blank document and just started riffing on the fly. He started creating a logo for somebody in the audience, and I think their name was like Sparrow or Bird or something. So he made like this bird logo, and so he drew this little line art, and then he drew, like, put in some text, and then he started playing off like the wording of how that interacts with the bird, and then before you know it, he's got this whole document just full of like, basically, I mean, stuff he's going to throw away. But it led him to see how this thing interacts with this thing, and it's something that you could have never gotten to if you were to just sit there and ponder and be like, I want to make a bird logo. I'll just sit here and think about it until it pops in my head. No, going through the work, putting in the work is what actually delivered that really unique logo. And that just goes to show you that it's not pretty. There's lots of stuff that gets thrown away, and creativity is a messy thing. So that was one thing I took away from Aaron Draplin. This is not Aaron Draplin. This is Bob Ross, and he is the one that coined the term happy accidents. Isn't that what it is? Happy mistakes, something like that? Happy trees. Yeah, happy accidents. So what that means is as you're doing something, as you're doing the work, things start to come up that you didn't plan for, and then you have to kind of figure out how to pivot around those while you're in the middle of doing what it is. And a lot of times they'll open up new insight into what you're doing. So for example, this little peninsula probably didn't even exist when he started. He probably dropped some paint on it and said, oh God, let's turn this into a happy accident and we'll make a little peninsula out of it. And now it's a cool thing. And maybe that peninsula made somebody buy this piece of art. Who knows? But just embrace accidents. There's also a study that was done on a pottery class. They said, all right, half the class, we want you all to think about the ultimate pottery piece and then come back to us in a few weeks and then make that piece. Then the other half of the class, they took them and they said, just do as many pieces of pottery as you can do. And so they did, and they just throw away. And then they came back, and of course the people who had done all the throwaway ones, they were like on it. Their stuff that they had gotten to had in a way been perfected through all the trial and error that they had gone through, versus the people who just thought about it and were like, here's a great thing, blah, 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 and it just falls apart. Another way you can embrace failure is to play with it. So this is a game called Donkey Kong. Miyamoto, who's Nintendo's mastermind, who created most of the games you all played, originally made this to be a maze game. And there was no jumping at the first. And he put this in front of a bunch of people. And as they played it, they started realizing that the one thing they wanted to do was jump over these barrels. And so he went back to the edit of the game, added jumping, and added a little points mechanism to it. And now this became like the de facto platformer that kind of started the whole trend of platformers back in the day, all because he just put it in front of somebody and said, what do you think about this? Just play with it and tell me. So it's a new way of looking at failing. Alfred Hitchcock, the way he would get his stories fine-tuned is he would write his story, he'd go into a dinner party, and then he'd tell a story, and he'd see how people would react, and he'd study them really carefully, and he'd go back and he'd see, like, well, did they react the way I wanted them to? And if they didn't, he'd go back to tweak his stories until he got the reaction that he really wanted. And that's how he knew that he was kind of done with what he was putting his story out there. And you can see, you know, so that was a way for him to get validation and feedback. And the way you can just imagine him sitting there studying. He's telling the story, but he's just sitting there waiting for people to not do what he's expecting them to do. Like he wants them to not do that so that he can get the right information to make it better. Now, another thing you could do, what are you doing on time? So if you're wanting to embrace failure, is to attempt something that's impossible, because if you fail at it, it's not a big deal. You just failed at something no one's ever done before, but it does give you some really cool constraints and lets you kind of be free to do what you want to do in trying it out. Now, this is my favorite plane when I was a kid. This made me want to be in the Air Force. But this was built back in the 1950s, back when, you know, you've got, just imagine cars and technology in the 50s, right? And this thing became the fastest manned plane ever made, and to this day still holds the record. But what happened was this was made by Lockheed Martin Skunk Works, which is a little independent division inside of Lockheed Martin that made all these future planes that didn't exist. Like they're making stuff that is on the cutting edge of technology that really has never even been done before. So this thing had to fly up to 85,000 feet. It had to go 3 times the speed of sound. It had to have skin that can contain 0 to 600 degrees, and it had to have stealth capabilities. It had to have all these things that individually all had never been done before, and combined it was just insane. Like no one, they thought this was impossible. But the government awarded them a 2-year time period with money to go with it to do it. So as they were doing this thing, they were literally building it on the production line floor. And you know, they would draw stuff on napkins, go out, they'd source manufacturers like on rubber for the tires. Like the tires had to be able to go up to almost space, which once they got up there, the pressure was different, so they had to use something other than oxygen to pump up the airs. So they realized they had to find like hydrogen or a different lighter gas that wouldn't expand so much. And then even things like the skin, they had to steal this titanium skin basically from Russia through all these little holding companies so that they could make the skin on this thing so it could withstand 600 degrees down to 0 degrees at sea level, depending on altitude. And then even before GPS was a thing, this thing on the back, that little dot, is actually something that they built that so that it would look at the stars, so it could tell where it was anywhere in the world just by looking at the stars. And that was like a new thing they had to invent just to make that happen. And this was just one of those things. As they were doing it, they were learning as they were going, and they were failing left and right, but they were bringing in people who knew what they were talking about. The hydraulic fluid for it, that didn't exist. There wasn't a hydraulic fluid that would go from 0 to 600 degrees and still be within the range that hydraulic fluid needed to be. So they would get samples sent in from universities and things. Okay. And so they outsourced to professionals who knew what they were doing to get them samples of things that would actually make their dream come true. So just do it, play with it, attempt the impossible. Now back to this thing about fail. I was listening to a podcast and I forget her name. Wait, it's on my thing. Oh yeah, Carol Dweck. She is a professor at Stanford. She basically gave me a whole new way to think about failure in general. And it's a lot along the lines, the thing you pinned in the channel about how second graders, that Nate had posted, how second graders think about like what they're doing. And if you just reword it, it kind of gives it a whole new spin. So she basically said if you reframe fail as not yet, it changes everything. They'd done this with students in Chicago, and they change them from getting failing grades to not yet grades. And that just changes the whole trajectory of what that means to fail. It just means you're not quite there yet. So, you know, if you're trying to run a 4-minute mile and you're 1 second over, you didn't fail, you're just not there yet. And so if you just take that, and maybe as you get bad feedback from a client, well, don't think of it as bad feedback, just think of it as that the thing's not there yet. And so that whole way of just reframing it, I think, was a very concise way to embrace failure.